we took this chance to revisit our epic structures and make it more clear what we're working on, because I believe we were closer aligned than it sounded, and also it was good to take a fresh look at what was absolutely necessary for the MVC. So the agenda reflects this, but we have two major milestones to discuss today. The first is the alpha release, as you discussed in the group conversation. We are approximately 2 weeks away from this. We have one issue to ship before we can toggle back and forth between the old and new web IDE. That will allow us to make it enabled by default in GitLab.com to everyone. And while you won't be able to commit from this new web IDE experience, you will be able to interact with the remote development MVC. Any questions on that before we move on?
Yeah, thanks for that. Appreciate the quick follow-up. What does the toggle look like? I'm trying to skim through the 6-minute video, but
yeah, let me show you.
See it. Maybe you can
here.
screen share something.
Yeah, let me share the screen. Oh, I see. It's just my wireframes on that issue. We do have the MR here. Oh, I see. It's in the. Here, let me share my screen. So when you open up the existing web IDE, you'll be presented with this window here, and we can change the language to make it very clear that the new web IDE is in alpha. And then when you open up the editor, we remind you we can shift this language, but right now the experience is that we let you know after you launch the new web IDE that it's under development, and then you can switch back to the legacy or classic web IDE experience from there.
How do you, once you close that box out, Eric, how do you switch back?
There, I believe, I need to double check on this. I believe there's a an option in the menu is what we landed on, but Marcel was on that MR. I'm not sure if that's actually the last MR that's in flight, so I'm not sure what the latest UX is on that one.
Hey, Eric, do you agree that just adding another drop-down option under the existing drop-down for the web IDE would be a far superior solution than this?
The reason we didn't do that is because we're running this off of the assumption that both won't coexist for long. We don't want the old web IDE and the new web IDE to be a choice. So we have a user setting that the toggle is effectively switching. And it would take more work, and it is very possible to do, but we can make the new web IDE run on an entirely different route. It just would mean maintaining the two editors simultaneously on separate routes and potentially updating some of the documentation around that split button toggle, which we're going to investigate after this iteration, but we're already down the path here on toggling between the two from within the IDE.
The web IDE today is the windowed experience while still exposing the GitLab menus, right?
Yeah, so it's
so I think it's likely that there's going to be preference between windowed and maximized. So I think what we can do is we can add an option now for a maximized one, which is the new VS Code, the new thing. After we kind of get a couple of releases of that in and get that up to snuff, we can switch out the windowed web IDE for the new version that doesn't look as nice, but it's windowed, and some people are probably going to prefer that. And those two options, windowed and maximized, will stay indefinitely, so we don't have to deprecate anything.
I can maybe lean on Marcel, and we can think about the UX there, but we wouldn't want to offer the choice up front on whether you want the windowed or full screen experience if all we're doing is hiding the global nav. This seems like something we could handle in the UI itself of the web ID and allow you to, with a keyboard shortcut, hide or toggle the nav. I actually just opened an issue to explore that today.
Okay. The concern I have is that we know we're shipping an alpha version and it isn't very good. And we're going to give each and everyone opening the web IDE a very prominent, like, hey, do you want to switch to the new experience? I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, that is a valid concern. The button behavior and placement should hopefully limit its exposure to those who are actively looking for it. But the wide availability of something that doesn't work is a bit of a concern.
You say it should have limited exposure. It seemed very prominent when I open up the web ID.
I believe you have to click that. It's like just an icon. It's like a little announcement icon, and that's when it's expanded. I don't know if it expands by default. I'll have to check on that.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I assumed it expanded by default. David?
It may. I can look into that.
I was just going to ask, like, the question that says, asking, did we do any user research or validation on that experience? Because even if it's collapsed, Eric, is there a guarantee that most users actually saw it and would expand it, right? And like what the frustration would be if I switch and then have to like figure out how to get myself back out because I can't actually commit. The warning about the I can't actually commit is after I've switched to the new ID and not before. And like, it sounds like there's not a way to get back easily.
Yeah, on that experience, we haven't run user research because until today, we weren't considering shipping the non-commit able version. And so that's why for that experience, we haven't run research. I'm setting up a research plan right now for the full screen versus including the global nav navigation. We can see if we can include that in the same research. That sounds feasible.
Yeah, I mean, all of this gives me the same concern I raised on the group conversation, right? Like I get worried that we're getting to the point where we almost get like one shot with the user. And if that experience is bad, they don't want to go try it again. And if I open up a web IDE thinking I can make edits and commit, and then I really just a glorified notepad at that point that I have to cut and paste my changes out to get somewhere else to commit. I just don't know if people are going to want to then go back to it without a bunch of encouragement to say, no, it does the things we said it did, or you expected it would do, right? So I'm open to disagreeing and committing with Sid, that is the CEO, if he wants to ship it that way, but that's my primary concern.
Look, I don't feel comfortable with what was just shared as a screenshot, like putting it in the face of all the people doing this. I think, look, we have an affordance in the UI to switch between different IDE experiences. And one of those options is Gitpod, and it's like an external thing and we don't control it and you have to set up all kinds of things. It's kind of high friction. Gitpod is really good, but the way to get there is high friction. I'm okay with adding another option, which is like Web IDE Alpha, which is high friction. People have to really seek that out to click that affordance and to do that. That allows us to bring something that is very far from complete, has a lot of problems, but like really kind of make it available to those who want, but not push it to those who don't, and not burn bridges with users who try it and are disappointed. So if we use that affordance, that drop down that we already have, I'm supportive of doing this alpha. But this was just presented where you toggle in between the two experiences. We're pushing something that is too early, too hard on users. And I don't feel comfortable with that at all. So please don't disagree and commit to something that I didn't propose. I didn't propose pushing our current web IDE users to this alpha experience. I just wanted to make it an option, just like Gitpod is. Nothing more. This is too much.
Understood.
Oh, so
well,
to be clear, that the thing that I was disagreeing on isn't that it doesn't give you the ability to commit. And it sounded like earlier you were okay with the option that it didn't commit. You can commit from the new web IDE.
If I push the drop down and I see Gitpod and web IDE alpha don't commit, as I put in the notes, can someone paste the notes of the conversation? I
can grab them.
I spelled out the different options. If it's so clear and the user still kind of proactively seeks out options and proactively clicks that, I'm cool with it doing what it says on the box. Just not okay with pushing people to it who now have something perfectly reasonable and saying, we got something new. Even if we put all the disclaimers there, it's still too active.
Understood. We'll have to revisit the timeline that would require running both applications simultaneously. And so I don't know if we can commit to the 2 weeks there, but I'll get back to you on that.
So I will say, Eric, I mean, this will be putting pressure on you, David, is the other David on the call, but where you are today and what it's asking for feels very doable in less than 2 weeks. It's like, instead of it being, it's adding another drop down to the existing drop down and having that launch into the experience, as opposed to going into the current IDE, needing to see the option to launch into it. So it's actually should lower the risk of it being successful because there's a lot less steps to it.
I don't know, David, I know you asked the other David, but I think what we would need to do is have a separate route because both web IDs run on the same route. We're swapping out the entire component in the view, essentially, and wrapping the new web ID. So we would create a new route for the new web IDE and tie that to the button rather than what we've done, which is conditionally load.
If you do it conditionally now, why can't you hit that condition? Why can't you create that condition when I click a menu option versus I click something in the web ID? I just don't understand the difference.
The challenge from the UX perspective is, I would imagine, would be if I have one repository open in one tab and I click open in the web ID, the current web ID, and I'm making some changes, and then I go to another tab in the same authenticated session and click try the new web ID, it's going to set that up at the user level as my preferred IDE experience. So it won't terminate my session, but the next time I load the web ID, I'll have to do the same dance over and over again. So we would need to separate ourselves from the user preference and move towards loading a separate route entirely and just making it available to everybody. It's totally possible. I just don't know what it would take.
That's helpful. Okay, I see all the problems now. That's super helpful.
Yeah, and we'll follow up. I can let you know how much that would push us out, if at all.
I think there's still an opportunity for us to make the access to this a lot less obvious and something that someone would seek, whether or not it becomes an option in the dropdown. It doesn't need to be a giant pane with a rocket ship on it that says, try out this new thing you can't commit in. So I think we can
Sure.
meet in the middle.
Yeah, we could do that too. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So I get the problem now, Eric. Thanks for explaining. And then I see why it would potentially be more work and wasteful work, and we might not want to do that. So I reject my proposal. And Sarah, if we can make it less obvious, then I'd feel a lot better.
Thanks for distilling that, Sarah. Yeah, you're right. There might be somewhere in between, making it less obvious and not necessarily building a new route for the web ID. But again, I'll have to validate with the engineers. It's possible that with very little effort, we can run the new web ID in a different route. So I'll follow up with that.
I would like to ask a separate question to make sure that on the UX side, we are aligned. Basically all cases I can think of right now where the user would jump into the web IDE and with the commit. That means that right now for productive work and for pieces where the user actually wants to complete a goal, it's going to be tough to give the new Web IDE Alpha as an option. So I would probably consider positioning the new Web IDE as something you can already try out now, but it's not probably, we should probably position it more in like a, hey, try it out, experience it, have fun with it, try to give us feedback on how we can improve, but not in a, you can use this already for use case A, B, or C. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Oh, one thing to consider, maybe it's worth discussing with this crowd, is I have a proposal, and Marcel, you've commented on it, of running the Web IDE on a different subdomain. And perhaps this would be the time to make that call or validate that approach, because if we just said, you know what, you want to try it out, you have to go type ide.gitlab.com or edit.gitlab.com or whatever we decide on that domain, then that's an action you have to take. It's relatively hidden, but it is still there. It does, the risk is it erodes our single application and reinforces the fact that this is a separate thing. But
Well,
could.
I'll introduce a different concern, though all that is very valid. If you're relying on subdomain to essentially not route but redirect, maybe if I'm a self-managed user and I'm not using an actual domain, I'm just using an IP address to get to my GitLab self-managed instance, like I now have to go do a bunch of other work to make that work.
Yeah, we had been talking about what the impacts were for self-managed and making that change. But the overall goal being that we wanted to explore separating the experience of the IDE from the project context, right? Have it more of a, I can just go to the IDE and start working, switch between projects and navigate within the IDE itself. It may be premature to solve that, but it's just a thought.
Yeah, does Codespaces have that?
Yeah, so you go to github.dev to load up their VS Code. And then once you're there, you have to then also launch a code space if you want the server runtime, which routes you to another domain. It's like, you know, a encrypted 2f3z whatever .github.dev.
Cool.
You know, I'm gonna double check it, but like the GitHub launches features first for their SaaS platform, and at some point in the future they show up on GitHub Enterprise. I know Copilot is only available on GitHub.com. I'll double check that might be the case with Codespaces as well. So they wouldn't have that problem, right? Because they default to SaaS first.
Yeah, my shortcut is a bit, if subdomain is the answer, we're asking the wrong question, a bit tongue in cheek, but subdomains tend to cause a lot of problems just by themselves.
Yeah, open to all that feedback on that proposal for sure. I won't push it through without considering all those. For the sake of moving through the agenda, the next release, though, that I define, the epic that's linked there, would be what we need to do to get to a place where you can commit from that new Web IDE experience. And so that I just wanted to note that would be the following iteration that we would be working on, is getting to the point where we can build out that commit functionality and you can actively contribute from the Web IDE, the new Web IDE.
Yeah, and sorry, that was maybe a bit too, that was a bit tongue in cheek. Like it might be, I can see the technical reasons possibly for a subdomain. It would be great if we can avoid it, but it might not be avoidable.
I have another question I would like to bring up. Between the alpha and the beta release, depending on how much functionality we're going to add, we also have some other limitations. One example is that currently in the VS Code Web IDE search, the search only works on all files that you have open as tabs in the Web IDE. So if you search for specific keyword, it will only go over like 3 to 5 files if you have these 3 to 5 files open. That's something where we don't yet have any communication on that to the user in the UI, and it could be very confusing to them. If we now release the version, the alpha version, without the commit functionality, should we also at least add communication in the UI that these pieces don't work yet, or will we leave that up to the user to explore and figure out on their own?
Marcel, that's a great, sorry, go ahead, Dirk.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that's a great question. And I think that we could still proceed with the current iteration plan and what we make available to users and just adjust whether it's an alpha or a beta. It could continue to be alpha. We absolutely want to have error messages or warnings like that. And so I think we'll just set expectations by what we call it. And that will be part of the roadmap and part of the maturity plan.
Yeah, what I'd say, Marcel, is you're hitting on exactly what I see the definition of iteration. So you can open it up, you can commit code. You might not be able to search your code yet. You might not be able to do like a large replace, like if you're rebasing something, you need to rename function calls. But if you can write code and you can push it in, like you've gotten to a point where it's usable.
The documentation is going to do a lot of heavy lifting here. We'll work with our new tech writer to document this as it goes out and is widely available. I do think there's some affordances in the UI that we might be able to do. Maybe we did have an issue about like a custom splash screen when you don't have a file open on VS Code Web IDE. We could potentially highlight a few things there and link to the documentation. It is a relatively low effort way to bring visibility to some of those challenges. I don't think we're going to get to solve the cross project search in any kind of beta, but we should at least make people aware of it.
Yeah, I would challenge you though, Eric, to say, if you get to the spot where I can go in, launch into the new Web IDE, and I can make a code change, I can commit it, even if that means I have to go back over to start the merge request as a first step. Like if you can commit a line of code, that's your like MVC GA. Like you don't need to call yourself a beta after that, right? So the multi-file searching against projects, including extensions, like all these other things you've mentioned, those are the past your MVC.
Yeah.
And are working towards viable or complete. But your minimal, no longer GA is that simple job to be done of edit a file and create a commit, right?
The E part of IDE, the edit part. I agree with you. The only thing I would add for GA would probably be some of that polish and the theme, our default theme that we would like to have to make it feel more branded, and then addressing feedback from the alpha and beta. So I just, I didn't plan this far ahead in the meeting, but I imagine there'll be a GA epic that collects a few of those things, but it won't be overly bloated, and we'll make sure that we're able to ship that pretty quick.
Yeah, I'd say that if you were to take one thing away from my comment, Eric, it's the sense of urgency on this, because this is being live streamed, but people will know, like, we are not where we want to be in this project, right? We're behind the competition, right? So anything you can do to get to the simplest job to be done and call it that MVC and that GA is critical. And that's why I've been pushing back on all the other things that occasionally come up. Like, they're all needed at some point in the future, but not to do that first job to be done.
Yep, totally understand. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the Web IDE because it is the vector in which you interact with remote development. But for the sake of discussing remote development during this meeting, we are also doing this, putting the same lens on our MVC plan and iterative plan for getting something out as soon as possible for the remote development that's iterating on the current functionality, which requires you to manage everything on your own. So we'll have more information on that as we build that plan for a custom server that interacts with the dev file. That's really the next step for our remote development category, separate from the Web IDE. Sid, you've got a couple notes here. I don't know if you want to voice them over.
Thanks. I want to acknowledge there's lots of tough technical trade-offs like route, state, domains, domains or subdomains. I appreciate you and Sarah educating me. I retract all of my suggestions. I was pretty adamant about the drop down, the subdomains, but I retract that. Thanks for trying to get to an alpha. I understand if it isn't possible.
Appreciate it. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here, and we understand the sense of urgency loud and clear. So we'll get it as quickly as we can without blowing our shot to impress people. And yeah, I'll have an update on the plan. I'll put it in the CEO channel as we get more information about how we can proceed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.